stereotypes parade in the next section. All right, so this section we're going to talk about, as I was saying, we're going to talk more about, racial biases. And so this is, remember, like, the stereotypes that we went over, these are stereotypes that are perpetuated by our media, our culture, our schooling, but then once we absorb these over time, our biases come out about how we feel towards different things, our preferences, our prejudices. This is a great chart. It just really kind of shows you like the biases between, situations, same situations, but how we have biases towards how different groups of people are deal with these situations, like smoking weed, like a bunch of white people are smoking weed, it's like, it's just, hippies, it's all fun, but when black people are, smoking weeds, they're thugs. White people on welfare are just poor. They're deserving poor. They're down on their luck. Black people on welfare are lazy and dependent. Good, during a good, whites can't find a job. It's just a bad economy. Blacks can't find a job. They're dependent. When white country bombs brown countries, like when we bombed, Baghdad, and it killed a lot of people, and we specifically targeted, water infrastructures and water treatment plants and things in hospitals, but we, that was deemed as we were bringing them democracy. But when white countries are bombed, it's terrorism. It's this big one. Like I grew up in Ohio, and Ohio State, all these there's a bunch of these college towns where these white kids would just like riot, for fun. Like when Ohio State would win or lose, they really badly against certain rivals or something. I don't know exactly what triggered it, but they would riot in the streets, all these white college kids, and burn cars and stuff. And like I went into Ohio University, and when the time change would happen, and we would lose an hour. Bars would close in an hour. There would be a riot in the streets, and people would, and that was all like good fun, But when then black people, take to the streets because they're literally being murdered, they're thugs, so it's it's really like white people in corporate positions, we automatically assume that they got there because they worked hard. But black people in positions of power, a lot of people have this bias that it must be affirmative action, or so this is how like these same situations, and because of our biases, based on all these stereotypes that we absorb, we have different thoughts. And not to say everyone, every white person thinks this, but a lot of white people, enough do. So even if you're like, oh, I don't think this, don't do that. Not every white person, because enough white people do, and they do it because we live in a white supremacy culture that pushes these white stereotypes onto it. So if you don't do that, that's great, but a lot of people do it, and a lot of times, our biases come out. Remember, they're subconscious. Even though we want to be the person that sees, black people and white people smoking pot as equal, that's not always going to come out in the moment. So, all right, but so the first, bias, I want to kind of dive into, the biases, racial biases that, children absorb from really young ages. And a really great test that proved this was called the doll test. This was done back in the 1940s. It was done to kind of prove that there were negative outcomes because of segregation, particularly around school segregation. And this was actually used during the Brown versus Board case, the Supreme Court case that actually desegregated our schools and outlawed, segregation, even though we're still very segregated and are continuing to increase our segregation every year. But legally, we're supposed to be desegregating and supposed to be integrating. And they actually used this case. This was not the main thing, but there was a lot of things that used to prove that segregation in schools were actually causing harm, and they used this the doll test to actually prove that that black people were having these biases, inferior biases towards themselves because of segregation. So I'm just going to play this clip. people have done this like probably hundreds of times. They've done this Bell test since the 40s and 50s, and actually just this was just a montage of different types of. I found this video that had like dozens of different doll tests. I just kind of edited it down to 2 tests. We're just going to watch real quickly, but you get the point. That I mean, all of them are basically the same.
Which doll is the black doll? And which one is the white doll? Which doll is the pretty doll? Which doll is the nice doll? Which doll is the bad doll? Which doll is the nice doll? And which doll is the bad doll? And why is that doll pretty?
Because he's white and he has 2 eyes.
Which doll is the ugly doll? Why is that doll ugly?
Because he's black.
Which doll looks most like you?
Like me.
Yeah, which one looks like you?
That one.
Show me the smart child. Okay, why is she the smart child?
Because she looks like me.
Okay. Show me the mean child. Okay, why is she the mean child?
Because she's way darker.
Okay. Show me the good child. Why is she the good child?
Because I think she looks like me.
Okay. Show me the bad child. Why is she the bad child?
Because she's a lot darker.
Show me the ugly child. Why is she the ugly child?
Because she's like a lot darker.
All right. Sorry about the sound on that, but hopefully everyone heard it. So yeah, that just goes on. I mean, like I said, there was a montage of just like from this video I found of just like dozens of tests like this and all the same results. And it's important to understand that there's no teacher saying teaching these kids that black people are ugly and bad and white people are beautiful and good. I mean, there's no one directly teaching. I mean, there might be some circumstances. For the most part, they're not being directly taught that. Kids are perceiving this. Based on the stereotypes that are played and white supremacy internalizations that are played out through all of our history, our schools, our communities, our culture, our media, our beauty products, all of this stuff. I mean, this is what kids are absorbing. So it's not, again, this isn't just like someone, evil people telling these kids this. This is our actual society that's teaching our kids this. And that's what really important to understand. So a big bias that comes out in our society is anti-black racial bias. So anti-black comes from a lot of different stereotypes throughout our history. We talked about a lot of our stereotypes from this like black criminality to stereotypes against black women to stereotypes against black people being dependency on things like social programs and stuff. So it it's because we push these stereotypes so much, our media and schools, and what happens is our biases. These are the direct results of these anti-black stereotypes. Is our biases. For example, every single part of our criminal justice system. Black people are treated, harsher. They're more likely to be pulled over, to be arrested, to experience police brutality. They're more likely to be killed, more likely to be arrested, more likely to be convicted by an all-white jury, more likely to, have a longer sentence, from a judge. That just feels like this person is just up to, worse than a white person who had done the same crime, more likely not to get parole, not to get out on bail, things like that. When we look at, like statistics, black people make up 12% of our population, but, they make up 35% of the people that are unarmed and killed by police, not resisting, unarmed, and were just literally killed. at the same time, so we also see this, with employers, white sounding names get callbacks on interviews, get, white people get more promotions, and things like that, based on a lot of these racial biases. Black students are 3 times more likely to be suspended than white students. Black girls 6 times more likely than white girls, for the same offenses. And that's because we have these biases towards Black kids, and especially Black girls. And we're going to talk more about this, but we treat them like adults. They're adultification to the point, and not in a good way. We treat them like they're responsible for way more than white girls are responsible for. And then a big one is just like white people feeling like they need to police Black people in public spaces. We've seen an epidemic of, white people being caught on camera calling, cops on Black people for doing not anything, not anything illegal. And, we want to say that's a new thing, but that's only because, it's not new. It's just we're recording more of it. That's something that's always happened. This is feeling that Black people in public spaces are some kind of threat, and same with like monitoring Black shoppers, and just like unjustifiably feeling unsafe around Black people, feeling like you have to cross the street or you have to hold on to your purse more when you walk by. And like that, those are, it's not just these personal feelings that you're holding inside yourself. You're creating these, what we call microaggressions, where we create these things where, that, Black people, they are affecting other people. They're affecting your children that see you do this. They're affecting the Black people that have to deal with this, like, trauma of being constantly having this, racial bias and racism thrown into their face. So, it's definitely like, this is a big one. The anti-Blackness is a big one that we need to work on in this country. So I really like this quote: "It is impossible to be unarmed when my Blackness is the weapon you fear," by Reverend Tracy Blackman. And that's really important because when we're playing this video from Megan Francis, and she's going to talk about how, like when cops are feeling, like they need to use force, they have to justify that they felt like there was a threat and that they were in danger or someone else was in danger. But when you're, born into society, you absorb all these like criminal, violent, stereotypes about Black people, you're going to have a different, because you have to make that snap decision, of whether someone's a threat. It's implicit, it's a snap, it's a fight or flight decision. It's not like you're doing some math equation and you're checking, am I being racist, am I, it's a feeling. And if you're prone, if you've been, absorbing Black stereotypes, Black criminal stereotypes, you're going to have that feeling of a threat, towards Black people in situations that you wouldn't have towards white people. And that's going to justify you doing really horrific, killing these people. So I'm going to play this video real quick.
First, part of the reason the killing of unarmed Blacks continues to happen at an alarming rate is because we haven't properly addressed our long history of racial terror in this country, which has treated Blackness as a proxy for criminality, as a substitute for criminality. Instead, when confronted with kind of these jarring racial injustices, what we like to do is to point to the bad racist apples. We like to individualize the problem and situate it away from us. This is why we're able to make sense of, let's say, a Dylan Roof, the shooter in Charleston, South Carolina, who shot up the Black church and had a white power manifesto. But the problem of contemporary racial violence is not that we have a few kind of racist bad apples. The problem is that the whole tree, the whole apple tree, is infected. The problem is that the presumption of dangerousness is tightly bound to race for so many in this country. For police officers to justify the use of deadly force, they have to reasonably believe that their lives are in danger. In all of the high-profile killings of Blacks over the past year, officers attest to feeling under threat. But what does this mean in the context of unarmed citizens? It means that Black skin triggers a heightened sense of threat, a life-threatening sense of threat, that then influences the officer's decision to use deadly force. According to the most recent statistics, 33% of Blacks that have been killed by police were unarmed. But it's not just police that prop up this myth of Black danger. This myth gets reinforced and takes on a truth-like quality through everyday interaction. When a Black man passes and a woman clutches her purse, or when a group of Black friends walk by a car and hear the jarring sound of someone who has just pushed their automatic locks because they are afraid.
All right. I definitely recommend watching this whole Megan Francis's whole TED talk. It's like a 18-minute or TED talk or something, and it's really powerful. So on that same lines, I want to kind of show how yes, even adults we have this racial bias of towards Black criminality, but I want to also see that this is not just an adult thing, that our children are still picking this up. And there's a Harvard study that found kids by age of 3 can start absorbing and accepting stereotypes, and by age 5 develop full racial biases. So by the age 5, they can have this unconscious explicit or unconscious implicit feeling, preference, bias towards people.
We brought together 3 groups of kids at this day camp and showed them pictures of 2 men, one Arab, the other Asian. Who do you like better, this man or this man?
The Chinese guy.
Over and over, they said they liked the Asian man more than the Arab.
He looks meaner and he looks nicer. Because he looks nicer? Yeah, he does look nicer. And he has a smile on.
But both men are smiling. And what did the kids think about the personalities of the men?
Let me ask, you don't know this person, but what do you think he's like?
I think he's weird.
Why is he weird?
He just doesn't look like a very nice person. No. He looks like a scary dude.
He's on the phone. What's he talking about?
Maybe a robbery?
Then I ask about the Asian man.
What's he like?
He looks like a regular teenager to me.
We then showed them pictures of a Black man and a white man. What were some comments about the Black man?
He looks mean. FBI most wanted. He looks weird. He looks like he's a basketball player.
So, tell me about this guy. Does he seem like a nice person?
I think he's nice. I think he's nice, except he might be mad about something.
He was probably picking up on something. This is Oklahoma City bomber Timothy McVeigh. But when we ask which man is a criminal, most kids pointed to the Black man. And when we asked which was a teacher, they said,
That one! The guy in the green shirt.
All right. So I found this study to be really fascinating. Jennifer Eberhardt did a study in 2008 about she wanted to kind of prove these racial different biases in police towards Black and white people. So she did a study where she did all these she had a group of police and she did these different exercises that kind of prime people with like your white faces and white people or Black faces and Black people and then from there she showed these like clips of these 41 frames of these like really blurry things that would gradually each frame get clearer, and the people that were showed a bunch of white faces and immediately shown these frames or actually the people that were shown Black faces and immediately shown these frames identified it as a gun far quicker than when they were primed with white faces. And I think this, just explains a lot of different situations. A lot, of Black people being shot because they were holding a phone, and all of a sudden that phone was supposed to be a gun. It's just like that jump, and you're already primed to think that it's something violent in that person's hand, like that. This comic by Jonathan Edwards, just this idea of just you're already primed to think that what is in that person's hand, what's in that backpack is something that's not good. And I'm gonna play this this clip. This organization in Oregon, this open carry organization, wanted to test open carrying between Black people and white people. So they tested this out, and I'm just gonna I know when you first watch this, you think something really bad's going to happen. Just everyone survives, so don't but it's just important to see the different reactions that towards a white person, a Black person, open carrying.
What's up, guys? SKS14 here. We're here with Warren. Hey, Warren, what are we doing today?
Just go out and exercise the rifle today.
Right on. Want to tell them a little bit about your YouTube page?
Just for educational purpose and also find professional, respectful, and constitutional officers in the state of Oregon and make sure we still keep our rights here pure and simple.
Right on. What's your channel called?
Mark Guardian. Up there, I'm audio recording. Audio recording.
I'm audio recording as well.
Recording.
Yes, sir. How you doing, sir? Why not? Okay. Any particular reason why you're carrying the AR, especially around this point? I understand that, but is there a reason why you're doing it? Of course.
He pulled out the gun. He's getting down. He's just walking up and carrying. I'm saying he has a reason to follow this. They're taking his weapon. He did nothing illegal. He's open carrying. They're putting him in handcuffs.
All right, we can stop it there. You get the general idea. I think that, you know, when we see, this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. You know, we see, you know, especially like in last year, all these like open carry, you know, a lot of these gun rights and white supremacists doing these like marches in Virginia to try to, you know, prevent any kind of gun regulations from happening. And they're all marching around with their assault rifles and stuff, and nothing bad happens to them. But then, you know, we look at what happens to unarmed Black protesters, you know, are just being brutalized right now. And I think, you know, there are a lot of great, you know, Black rights, you know, gun rights, you know, gun, you know, organizations, and there's been like this push to kind of normalize Black people with guns, and also to, you know, to you know, kind of try to tap into that. There's been some, you know, Black, you know, marches with guns and stuff, to try, you know, just, yeah, again, to try to normalize this and also try to use it as a tool for protest. But and I think at the same time, you know, like that's great and support that. But at the same time, the reality is like, I mean, police are going to treat people, you know, Black people with guns differently. And I see this a lot with white people, you know, that are, you know, anti-gun regulations. And we try to talk to them about, you know, like we need to, you know, keep these white supremacists from having these like assault rifles, and because they're killing a lot of people, and their excuse is, oh well, everyone else should just arm themselves, and I think that's an ignorant notion, because you're thinking, you know, that people are treated the same, you know, all armed people are treated the same, when they're definitely not. And we're going to actually have a whole class on a whole section in one of our classes on the history of gun regulations and how that's always been used, whether pro or anti-gun regulations. It's often used to enforce white supremacy by keeping people, you know, keeping white supremacists armed and everyone else unarmed. But we're going to dive more into that, you know, but I just want to kind of show like the biases that play out in this idea of you know, people being armed. So next, I want to talk about the school to prison pipeline, because this is a major source of racial bias. This is something that's being fueled by racial bias. I mean, a lot of it started out as being this, like, you know, intentionally. It's like not to be. It wasn't never meant to be. You know. Well, let me backtrack a little bit. So this, you know, so the idea behind the school to prison pipeline is that Black people, Black students, particularly Black girls, are treated a lot different than white students. They're you know, treated more like adults. They're held to higher standards. They're expelled easier. They're suspended easier. They're arrested by, you know, officers in schools and brutalized a lot easier, at disproportional rates compared to white people from doing the same offenses. is, and that's producing and when we suspend and expel and arrest these kids, that they're setting them up on this what we call school to prison pipeline, where they're more likely to end up in prison eventually. And then a lot of this came about because of the school shootings, particularly starting in Columbine decades ago, and this need to there was this good intention effort to put in more police in these schools to basically prevent school shootings, but when reality we put more these police into non-white schools, and we're actually seeing the end result of these students is these police are treating these black kids differently and are brutalizing and arresting black kids much more. So even though there was good intentions to protect our kids, the result is we're seeing a lot of racist outcomes. So I'm going to play this video by Fox. Explain this a little bit more.
There's this phrase that you might hear in the news sometimes, the school to prison pipeline. It's shorthand for how schools are funneling students, especially black students, into the criminal justice system. It started in the 90s when schools responded to fears about crime with zero tolerance policies, which mandated suspensions and expulsions for certain violations. They also cracked down on little things like talking back or uniform violations. The hope was that it would keep bigger problems from bubbling up. But as a result, out-of-school suspensions have doubled since the 1970s, and they keep increasing, even though juvenile crime rates have now been dropping for years. Around the same time, the number of police officers stationed full-time inside schools has increased by a third between 1997 and 2007. Ostensibly, they were there to prevent mass school shootings like the one at Columbine, but they end up being a way for schools to basically outsource discipline to the police. Schools with officers have 5 times as many arrests for disorderly conduct as schools without them. Sometimes the results are shocking. But the less visible effect is that schools are feeding the racial disparities in the criminal justice system. Consider the fact that schools are more likely to have an officer on their campus if the student population is more than 50% black. You might assume that that's because there's more crime at these schools, but although students at police schools are more likely to be arrested, they're not actually more likely to be charged in court for weapons, drugs, alcohol, or assault, at least according to one study. During the 2010-2011 school year, 1 in 6 public school students in the US were black, but they accounted for 1 in 3 arrests at school. Same goes for other forms of school discipline. Black students are suspended or expelled 3 times more frequently than white students. It actually begins in preschool. 18% of preschoolers are black. But of all preschoolers suspended more than once, 48% are black. Studies show that differences in behavior can't fully account for these disparities. Black students and white students are sent to the principal's office at similar rates, but black students are more likely to end up with a serious punishment. One study found that white students are more likely to be suspended for provable offenses like smoking or vandalism. Black students are more likely to be suspended for subjective offenses like talking back or insubordination. Students who are suspended in school are more likely to later drop out or get arrested, so the federal government is asking schools to make suspension and expulsion the absolute last resort. In Oakland, California, public schools are trying something called restorative justice, where both parties in a conflict talk it out with a counselor instead of relying on punishment. The results are pretty encouraging. In the last 10 years, chronic absenteeism is down and graduation rates are up in the schools that have tried it. Other cities and districts are also trying new policies. They're hoping that if their students end up in the criminal justice system, at least it won't be because the schools pushed them there.
All right, and I can't say enough great things about restorative justice programs and how it's really reversing a lot of these trends, and not just in schools, but in general, it's really kind of stopping this pipeline towards prison. But, and at the same time, we need to understand this is just a small percentage. The majority of our schools are still in this zero tolerance punishment. Majority of our schools are still disciplining black students much worse than white students. So a big part of this is what we call the adultification bias of Black girls, and there's been a lot just in the last I wouldn't even say decade, like in the last like 5 or 6 years, has been written about this. There was this really powerful 2017 study, and then a recent study that Georgetown just did about this. There's a great book Monique Morris wrote about Push Out. It's just what Black girls experience in schools, and I'm gonna read this real quote up here real quick. Well, first thing we need to understand is Black girls are suspended 6 times more than white girls, and this is a statistic that came out at the same time that Black boys were suspended 3 times more. But if you look at almost every if you look at like every school to prison pipeline, every study, it's just basically focused on Black boys, and there's not a whole lot of attention. At least it hasn't been until the last couple of years, and it's still not an equal amount of attention that's focused on just how much more Black girls are suffering than Black boys, and that's we're going to talk a lot more about this with our patriarchy and white supremacy and how that when you combine these two, how much harsher the realities are for Black women and Black girls. But I want to read this quote real quick. The Casey-funded report, Girlhood Interrupted, the Erasure of Black Girls in Childhood. This was a 2017 report. Found that adults viewed Black girls as less innocent and more adult-like than white girls on the same age, especially between 5 and 14 years old. When compared with white girls, Black girls were perceived as needing less nurturing, protection, support, and comfort, and being more independent and knowing more about adult topics, including sex. And then there was a Georgetown report. It's called. It came out, I think, last year. And listening to Black women and girls live experiences of adultification, and they found that Black girls routinely experience adultification bias. They're treated harsher with higher standards. It mixed with a lot of. We're going to talk in the next section. We're going to talk about a lot of misogynoir, which really bad Black stereotypes that are just for Black women. It's like combining racism and sexism, and that's not just when we're finding is not just towards Black women. It's also towards Black girls get that as well. The angry, aggressive, hypersexual, kind of assumptions and reactions to Black girls. Adultification, and so it contributes. Some of the biggest factors they found, racism, sexism, and also poverty as well. Class is definitely something that's been contributing to this adultification bias of Black girls. So Georgetown made this really cool video, part of their campaign to try to end adultification bias. I'm gonna play this real quick.
In the United States, adults view Black girls as less innocent and more adult-like than their white peers starting as young as 5 years old. This is known as adultification bias. A groundbreaking study by Georgetown Law Center on poverty and inequality found that adults believe Black girls need less nurturing, less protection, less support, and less comforting. And related studies show that Black girls are punished at a disproportionate rate in schools and the juvenile justice system. These statistics reveal an alarming reality. But do they reflect the experiences of Black girls and women? We conducted focus groups across the country to hear about their lived experiences. They told us that Black girls often face higher standards.
I feel like you cannot make mistakes as a Black girl.
All kids make mistakes, but in similar situations, Black girls are treated differently. A white girl's mistakes might be met with sympathy and understanding. But time after time, Black girls are punished instead because they are held to a more adult standard of behavior.
Everybody says, oh, you should have known better. They're not even acting like we're children.
Those different standards may be linked to harsher treatment for Black girls. We heard stories about adults holding Black girls more accountable for their actions.
During a foursquare game at school, one of the balls hit a girl in the face. They just threw assault and battery on my record. I had to transfer to a different school, but the other school didn't want to take me because I had assault and battery on my record.
In our focus groups, they overwhelmingly agreed that adultification bias is associated with punitive treatment. Negative stereotypes of Black women are also projected onto Black girls, which can contribute to adultification bias. Focus group participants overwhelmingly confirmed that even when they were young, adults viewed them as less innocent than their white peers.
There was this assumption that you're cussing people out, drinking, and having sex. But since I never thought about that before, they were basically introducing me to those topics right then. In 6th grade, the school nurse asked my aunt if I was sexually active. And I was like, at the time, like, what? Nobody has sex. Like, I didn't know anyone that has sex. She would never think to ask my white friend that.
Black women and girls also told us that adults stereotype them as too loud, aggressive, or angry, and see Black girls' actions as threatening and disrespectful. Adultification bias erases the distinction between childhood and adulthood, which can have a harmful impact on the lives of Black girls. We need to work together to end adultification bias. These findings in our new study provide key insight.
So yeah, if you do want to, you can check out their report. You can download it for free. It talks a lot more, goes into depth about the things they just talked about, as well as check out Push Out. There's actually, I think there's a documentary, a couple of them around that as well. That's worth checking out. So last thing we talk about with schools is also dress code discrimination. This is unfortunately, it's not just a school problem. It's a work problem as well. It's mainly with this idea that our not only our beauty standards but also our work and professional standards are all based on the white standard. And I talked a little bit about this. I see here a lot of white people. They push back and everything. What do you mean? Like, all of us have to, dress professional. It's just a thing, and again, this isn't about giving exceptions to Black students or Black, professionals. This is about opening up what our standard is and moving it away from this white standard. The professional haircut is based on white haircuts. The clothes and culture, is based on white clothes and culture. So it's about, creating a more diverse one that doesn't create additional barriers for Black, Indigenous people of color. Particularly with, a big thing is against like dreadlocks and or saggy pants or things. And a lot of that, like that does create additional barriers. Like if your hair is naturally, grows into dreadlocks, I mean, there's a, in Black culture, there's, or in other Black country, or basically any country that's not dominated by white supremacy standards, dreadlocks can be very professional. There's a lot of professional standards out there, but the fact that we just have one white standard when we need to kind of open it up and realize that there's professional standards for that go beyond for every cultural group. But I'm going to play this video real quick about
My son just got told he cannot attend the school with his hair. If that's not bias, I don't know what is.
The first day of school at a private Christian school in Apopka, 6-year-old Clinton Jr. is turned away because he has dreadlocks. His father says he was so stunned, he started shooting video on his cell phone.
And they just told my son he can't come to school because he got hair. Wow, I can't plait it up. Can I braid it up?
After much conversation and confusion, Clinton Stanley says staff members explained it's a rule. Boys cannot wear dreadlocks at the school, called A Books Christian Academy.
If a kid has dreadlocks, that's your personal standard. That's a personal standard. That meaning that's a personal problem you haven't overcome, because 95% of the kids that have dreadlocks are African American.
You can see my school, it's probably 95% Black. Obviously, I'm not a racist.
John Book, the school's director, says it's their standard, says since it's a private school, he has that right, and it's a standard spelled out in their handbook. All boys' hair must be tapered cut off the collar and ears. There are to be no dreads.
And in our school, our song is, Jesus loves the little children of the world, red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in his sight. But we try to uphold certain biblical standards and certain degrees of order that enable us to maintain a school.
Right. So two things on that. One, like, what biblical standard are you? I mean, what, like, it's one, the Bible doesn't, have a white standard, but we, white culture has, standardized the Bible to be white. Jesus is white when he was literally like a Palestinian and in the middle of the Middle East, or maybe not Palestinian, but he was in that area. Like, he definitely wasn't a white person. But also, like, this idea that white culture is biblical, is something that came from, like, from the South, during slavery, and trying to redefine the Bible to kind of justify, white supremacy. So this idea that he's justifying a white dress code on black kids because it's a biblical standard, there's a lot to unpack there. But and another thing is he says that, if your school is 90% black kids, why is he enforcing a white standard? Why can't they have a professional standard based on black culture if the majority of people are in, or just a not even like a black culture standard, just a multicultural standard, not just a white standard, so there's definitely a lot to unpack, but like what that guy said. So the next bias I want to get into is medical biases. So healthcare biases, biases that we see that come out with doctors, and in the healthcare industry in general. There's a lot of these biases came from these stereotypes during slavery. During slavery, a lot of medical practices were founded, and they were founded by basically white doctors experimenting without consent on black enslaved people without using anesthesia. The father of gynecology, James Marion Sims, he created the whole, all his practices he created that founded gynecology came from experimenting on enslaved women without anesthesia. And that was, they downplayed. I mean, I'm sure a lot of that was that they just didn't, care enough, or they didn't feel like, actually paying for anesthesia or things like that. But a lot of that was like, or maybe, yeah, actually, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what anesthesia was actually available at the time. So I'm not going to, say assumptions based on why they did that, but one of the reasons that they justify a lot of that is because they came up with these ideas that black people were they had thicker skin. They came up with these stereotypes that black people had thicker skin. They didn't feel pain like white people, so it was okay to experiment on them and do because it didn't really bother them that much. When in reality, they were just creating these stereotypes to kind of justify the horrific torture they were doing on these enslaved people. But that really never went away. It was never challenged, and it really permeates. It's a part of our medical culture even today. I mean, there's been a lot of studies lately where they found that that a lot of patients, or a lot of doctors still have this unconscious racial bias towards black patients, particularly with not listening to them, particularly around pain. They don't believe them as much about pain, or they automatically assume that they're addicts that are trying to get pain medications more, even though like the opioid epidemic right now is mainly a white epidemic, but the bias is more towards black people. It's coming out more towards black people, and so we and that's not, again, stereotypes versus biases. I'm sure if you ask most doctors today, do black people have thicker skin, they're going to say no. But but if you follow them around and monitoring them, their bias comes out unconsciously, where they're actually treating black patients like they do have thicker skin. So that's really important to kind of separate the two. Again, we're not saying black doctors believe these stereotypes, but we are saying that they have unconscious biases from these, the foundations of these stereotypes. So that's really important to understand the two factors, or to separate the two. And these biases come out, and we see the results of these biases with really horrific health disparities among black people, particularly among black women. And that was, the racial bias isn't the only reason why there's health disparities. Access is a big one. Because of our racial segregation, a lot, Black people have less access to decent health, services. Also, a thing called weathering. We're going to talk more about this in another class, but weathering is basically the physical trauma that you experience when you experience racism every day, and how like the stress of racism literally just tears Black bodies down. We see that with Eric Gardner's, daughter, we talk about her. I mean, she had a heart attack when she was, I think she was like around 30 or something. Don't quote me exactly, but a lot of that was just like the trauma of all the racism that she experienced, not only with her father, but herself, and becoming an advocate, fighting it, and it just wore her body down. And that's what's happening to a lot of Black people, or a lot of people in general who experience racism every day. But a lot of Black people are experiencing anti-Black racism, and it just wears you down. And so, but you look at the statistics of that, the weathering, the access to resources, but also the racial bias, the fact that most Black people have experienced discrimination in some form with doctors, and a lot of Black people will avoid hospitals because of that. So you see, like just the statistics, I think the biggest one, Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die as mothers than white women under the same conditions. Black women are 22% more likely to die of heart disease, 71% more likely to die of cervical cancer. So we see the outcomes of a lot of these racial biases are pretty horrific. So I'm gonna play another video kind of explaining a little bit more about implicit bias in healthcare.
So in healthcare, bias comes in various forms. And I would say there's 3 primary ways that we could actually track bias. One, of course, is in interpersonal interactions, let's say between a patient and a provider. So the unconscious ways that we may have associate certain groups, certain people with certain gender identities, people from certain racial or ethnic backgrounds, manifest in the diagnoses we're making, the interactions we're making with the patients, as well as the warmth with which we're working with them, which impacts the amount of trust that they have in the providers themselves. How does that manifest? One of the major ways that's been studied and shown and reported over and over again is pain management. So patients with darker skin, African Americans, receive lower dosages of pain medication across the board, from infants to the elderly, for the same types of ailments they come to practitioners for, because of assumptions that are being made around addiction or their ability to actually be truthful around what they're experiencing. The second way bias really plays into all of this, particularly unconscious bias, is the internal dynamics of organizations, how employees and staff members communicate with one another, team collaboration, team dynamics, but as well as performance reviews around compensation. Who gets to be promoted? Who gets to be a leader of an organization, of a team, based on assumptions that we may have about those people, purely based on phenotype, their origins, whatever that may be. And the third way bias really plays out in healthcare, and this is quite well documented across the board, is its costs, wasted costs. So racial bias, just one particular identity that we're concentrating on, costs the US economy, the healthcare system, $310 billion a year. And for me, I just want to think about what can we do with that money if we didn't have bias in the world.
All right. So the last racial bias I want to talk about is called linguistic profiling. So this is the idea that a lot of times we feel like a racial bias only comes out, especially when it's racial, based on skin color. It comes out because we're seeing the race, but in reality, it also comes out verbally as well. And linguists, you don't need to actually see it. You can still identify who you're talking to over the phone. You can still, for the most part, identify their race and then still perpetuate racial bias, without even seeing the person. And then to prove that, John Baum Bong, I think, a linguistic at Washington. Sorry, I have trouble saying that word. At Washington University. So he did an experiment in the 1980s where he called all kinds of landlords in the San Francisco area. And he was really good at using different dialects. So he used like white dialect, black dialect, Latinx dialect, and he called about seeing the same apartments. And what he found was that he got the same exact results as most studies that do it in person. That when you use a white standard dialect, he saw, got offered all kinds of apartments, or at least you see apartments. And when you use the black or Latinx dialect, he saw less than he saw a significant less amount of apartments. So I'm going to play another video from Insider talking about this, but also talking about one way that black people, but a lot of black indigenous people and color deal with this is they do a thing called code switching, which is one way to try to overcome this reality, but it still doesn't ignore the reality that we're living in.
Can you tell what race I am just by hearing my voice? Correct. Turns out Americans are pretty good at guessing your race just by hearing your voice. It's called linguistic profiling, and we all do it. There are certain auditory cues that give us subtle hints about who we're talking to. A lot of black Americans speak what's referred to as AAVE, or African American Vernacular English.
AAV is non-rhotic, meaning that, like a British accent, there are no R sounds at the end of words or at the end of syllables.
John Fleming is a speech and dialect coach for movies and video games.
Generally speaking, there's the TH sounds, the th, and the get replaced with something, generally a T or a D. There's a few other vowels and things, but it kind of keeps going, and it gets kind of into the weeds a bit.
When it comes to being on the phone, though, black people often try to sound more white.
Yes, Mr. Ribbon, I would love to have the opportunity to sit with you to discuss some of our products.
It's a form of code switching, or in this case, alternating between two different dialects.
Did you try to grab me by my collar, right? That's not...
Good morning, customer service. My name is Philip.
Black people talking white is having a real moment in media right now. Sorry to Bother You is a movie about a black salesman whose career only takes off when he starts talking white.
You want to make some money here? Use your white voice.
Hey, Mr. Kramer. This is Langston from Regal View.
And Black Klansman is a movie about a black detective who infiltrates the KKK by pretending to be white over the phone.
God bless white America.
The idea is to speak in what's called the standard accent.
The standard accent is the one spoken by the majority group or the socially advantaged group.
Olivia Kang is a psychologist at Harvard. She's working on a project that explores the hidden biases we hold.
If you speak with the standard accent, you're judged as being more intelligent, more competent, more credible, more hireable. Now having a regional accent or a non-standard accent, now you're not getting those advantages. You're seen as less credible or less hireable.
These biases are implicit.
All right. So when we're talking about code switching, so one, if you haven't seen that movie, Sorry to Bother You, the Boots Riley movie, it's so good, and definitely check that movie out. But at the same time, sometimes we have humor about code switching. We see it on Saturday Night Live, and it can be funny in certain ways, but also it hides a really bad reality. The reality is that, again, white standard is a norm. The professionalism, if you want to be, professional, if you want to, get ahead in the world, you have to, kind of dump your culture and become more white. You have to speak white, and it goes along the same ideas of colorism around, like you have to, dress white, you have to lighten your skin, it's all the same. This idea that white is the standard, and that's the real problem. Is that we need to dismantle the white standard, not come up with these clever ways for black people to participate in the white standard. So. And then this last slide, I want to just post this up. It was just a survey, that was done with 16,000 voters in 2016, white voters, about, it was basically trying to find, different racial biases among all voters and trying to engage them, ask a series of different questions about, how, do they think Black people were less intelligent or had less work ethics. So all these like kind of racist, dehumanizing racial biases, because and I posted this because a lot of times we again, like most racism, we think that we're not a part of this. This is just some other evil person doing this. And you can see, yes, like the Trump voters have the most racial biases. I don't think that is going to be surprising for too many people. But what surprised me as well, or at least a reality that we all should understand, is everyone else still appeared on this chart. I mean, like there's still like Clinton voters, in the 20 to 30% for all these really horrific, racial biases. So I posted this not, just to kind of remind everyone, we're all part of this. We're all born in this society. We all absorb this stuff. I don't care how woke you are or what kind of environment you were born in. You absorb some kind of, racist stereotype, some kind of internalization. And this is something we all need to be a part of, becoming aware of it and working on dismantling it. And we'll talk more about how to actually confront racial biases in another section.